Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Carl Cranney. I have a PhD in religion, and I've written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture. And I'm a Latter-day Saint, and with me today is my co-host, Liz.
Hey everyone, I'm Liz Busby. I teach writing at BYU, and I study the intersection of religion and science fiction and fantasy.
And joining us today also as our guest is Mr. Christopher Cunningham. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm the publisher of Public Square Magazine, and I'm happy to be back on my favorite Latter-day Saint-themed movie and television podcast.
You're very kind. Thank you. And also joining us today is Ben Pacini. Ben, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Ben Pacini. I'm faculty at BYU, Idaho. I teach classes in economics because it's fun and teaching because I was built for it. I like to do all the things, but teaching teachers is probably my number one. That's what I do full time. That's my real gig.
Thanks for joining us. Today we will be talking about Truth and Treason, a 2025 film directed by Matt Whitaker about Helmuth Hübener, an LDS teenager growing up in Nazi Germany, who led a leaflet campaign against Hitler and was eventually executed as a traitor to the Nazi regime. But first, our best books segment, where we each recommend one thing we are watching, reading, or listening to. Liz, why don't you go ahead and start us off this time?
Sure. My recommendation is Prince of Egypt. We watched it because we're doing the Old Testament this year. Passover was right before Easter, so we watched it the week we were reading about the plagues. And honestly, I cannot believe we got this film. Like, every shot is beautiful. The script is immaculate. All of the songs are bangers. There's not a bad song in there. So, we don't deserve this film, and you should watch it because it's excellent. It's still just as good, even though it's 30 years old now, and I remember seeing it in the theater. But you can't say that about many 30-year-old films, that there's no cringy moments. There's nothing wrong with it. It's absolutely perfect. So, my other recommendation is that Berg Indie's short Mormon horror film called The Angel is now available on YouTube. And I don't know, I think I've talked about it before on the podcast, but you couldn't see it anywhere unless you went to the film festivals. And now it is finally available. So you should definitely get on and watch it.
All right, I'll go next on the recommendations. I just finished Starfleet Academy, and I had some issues with it. I'm sure those will be apparent to anybody who's listened to this podcast, but I liked it, and I am sad that it got canceled, and I thought we could have used 4 years of Starfleet Academy and just chop off a couple of years of Discovery, and that'll even out the cosmic scales. So I'm sad that we're getting another season of it, but that will be the end of the show. I'm a little sad about that. Something else sort of on theme with our Truth and Treason topic today is the film Nuremberg. I finished it just earlier today, actually, and if you want a really good, weighty, sort of meaty dive into how do we deal with such atrocities when they occur, Nuremberg would be another great recommendation. And so I like that as well. Chris, why don't you give us something that our listeners can watch, read, or listen to? What have you been up to lately on that front?
After trying and failing to read Way of Kings 3 times, at Liz's never-ending persistence that Brandon Sanderson is a genius, I decided to jump into Elantris. And so I have been reading Elantris almost nonstop for 2 weeks. I'm finding that so engaging, so fascinating. So hopefully I'll jump into Mistborn after that. In fact, there wasn't a lot, but I found a couple of small things from there I'll probably share today. Quick Truth and Treason of all the funny things. But yeah, so if you have also tried and failed to get into Brandon Sanderson, I suggest Elantris might be an easier way in. Oh, and I should also recommend The Angel, which Liz did too, but in the mouth of two witnesses. Truly phenomenal. Very glad it's finally available to the public. Go check it out.
I know it's not my turn, but I feel like I have to pitch in here and just say, I love Way of Kings. I think I would have hated Brandon Sanderson if I had started with Way of Kings. His short fiction is some of the best work that he does. Read Emperor's Soul, read Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell, because I really believe there's something about constraints that makes us better at things, and that's all of Earth life and our theology. He does really good work when it's short, and it's so captivating. And so, yeah, highly recommend his short stuff as well as his long form.
My problem, Chris, is that I've already read Elantris, and I don't want to get into any more of Brandon Sanderson because I'm looking at the corpus going, man, how do you start eating this elephant? But I'll get around to it someday. Anyway.
I'm always here to advise you, Carl. Just let me know.
Well, you and Ben are, the missionaries for our good friend Brandon Sanderson. You'll convert me someday, I'm sure. It's not that I lack the desire. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and I just have so many other books to read. I don't know. Ben, what do you have for us?
I was captivated by Silo. A good dystopian is something you need every once in a while, and this is the most dystopian. The world is awful and everybody is terrible. And it was still somehow really, really compelling. I am just setting myself up already for like the lowest possible expectations of it's going to end terribly. Like they're not going to wrap up storylines. I'm going to be emotionally not like they're not going to deliver, but it's been a really great ride in the meantime because like my expectations are now way up here, but it's been really well written, really interesting. And when I step back, I'm like, do you have the capacity to end this well? It is unclear. I've also been enjoying Lincoln Lawyer. I like A Really Smart Show. Those are kind of my big, most recent ones.
I liked Silo a lot myself. It was interesting because I felt like parts were a critique of religion. Everybody's following the pact, their Bible really slavishly. And yet we got in the beginning of season 2 an example of, and I'm trying not to spoil it here, like what happens when you don't follow the pact? Like everybody dies, so you should probably follow the pact. And it's just really interesting. They have renewed it for season 3 and 4, Ben. I don't know if you know this, and they're going to wrap it up. And my dad enjoyed the books. He got into the books because of the TV show, and he thought those were fun and wrapped up well. And
that actually gives me a lot of hope because like one of my big fears, I think I was forever burned. It might have been Babylon 5. But there was a series that I watched when I was younger, and it was like, actually, Firefly is probably the best example, where it's like, you actually had a good story, and then you botched it. And I've always just been like, what if it goes poorly? But yes, when somebody has a book they are basing it on, it's always way easier for me to trust that like, okay, you have a good story, just don't screw it up. Don't fumble at the end zone, and we could get by. So that one was, that's been a good one.
Okay, wait a minute. You don't like Babylon 5 or Firefly? I think I have to kick you off the podcast.
No, the opposite. So I'll tell you both things.
Oh, okay.
Firefly is actually one of my all-time favorites. And to be clear, there's some caveats with the recommendation there, right? I am a prude and I still loved it. But for my fellow prudes out there, Firefly has some spice, right? Like, let's just get that out of the way. Firefly is genius and they ruined a good story. They being Fox, not they being Joss Whedon and the crew. And so I'm all about like, bring back Firefly. Babylon 5 very much felt like jumping the shark. Like they had the perfect story and then they just did some weird stuff with it. The seasons didn't quite order right. They got rid of some of their best cast at the end of season 4 because they weren't sure if they were going to renew or not. From what I gather, Babylon 5, the author, the writers, all the producers were told, you get one more year, wrap it all up. And he was like, no, it's 5 seasons. You can't just give me 4. And they said, too bad, figure it out. At the end of season 4, they had wrapped everything up. And then they said, okay, fine, we'll give you another season. He's like, we already wrapped everything up. What do you want us to do? So he had to just kind of like come up with stuff on the fly. And I was like, this is how you kill great shows and great TV. So when I reference those two, that's more what I'm going for. But there are some shows where you can just tell the author hasn't thought through the final arc. They've got a really compelling set of like episodic grab your attention, but the overall arc is just not there. So the fact there's a book involved with Silo makes me excited, and I'm hoping that it pays off in the end.
Okay, now I understand why you're saying they ruined the story. The antecedent to they was unclear. TNT renewing Babylon 5 for an extra season when they'd already wrapped everything up. And Firefly, of course, by being unceremoniously canceled by Fox, which we are still mad about 25 years later.
Have not gone over
You
it.
guys
Still
know
hold
they're
that grudge.
making season 2 of Firefly,
Yes.
right?
Yes, I am so sorry. Like beyond excited. Like I'm just like over the moon. I've been sharing it like all the time.
Okay, just clarifying. That is happening.
I think, Liz, we may have erred in having two of our best friends on this podcast because this is not very podcasty. This is more us just sitting around as if we were sitting around a table talking, which is maybe what the podcast should always be. I don't know.
We should get around a table and talk. I think that's the problem.
That's exactly what we should do. We're clearly a release valve for how much we like each other. It's like, all right, say all the things. We've only got an hour.
All right. Well, on that note, we will have links to all these recommendations on our website, popcultureapricottree.com. Buying through these links helps support our podcast. And now on to our main discussion of Truth and Treason. I gotta say, for this particular episode of the podcast, normally we watch the show or the movie, and maybe Liz will read a couple articles or something about it. I may be over prepared for this one because I watched the movie, I watched the miniseries, I listened to like a Mormon Land episode from the Salt Lake Tribune's Mormon Land podcast, 2 podcasts from Radio West. All those are sort of in November 2025. I read Moroni and the Swastika by David Connolly Nelson, which I don't recommend because it's terrible. And also the spring 2025 issue of Latter-day Saint Historical Studies, which puts a dagger to the heart of David Connolly Nelson's book about the secret Nazi files on, like the SS files on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I am thoroughly prepared to talk about this subject now, and I hope I didn't over-prepare, but there's a lot of interesting and good stuff for those of you who are, I hope you're a podcast listener because you're listening to this, but there's a lot of good interviews with people and things to sort of see the background of this one that are all Latter-day Saint adjacent sorts of things. So anyway, it's very interesting. Let's go around the horn really quick and just get some thoughts from people on how they liked the movie overall. Ben, contribute as you feel you are able.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to balance out Carl here because I have really big plans to watch the movie and I have a lot of opinions. This is a very me thing to do, being like, I know nothing, but let me weigh in authoritatively nevertheless. And I am excited to have the conversation because I have a lot of questions and I appreciate y'all's views. So maybe I can be the foil to be like, what did you think and what's legit and what's not?
Chris, what were your thoughts about the movie?
Well, I think the big preview, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was my 513th favorite movie, right between Eternals and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So certainly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It was not an over-the-top experience for me or anything. I certainly think this director is going to be an up-and-coming star. This was his first feature film that he directed. I know this was kind of a passion project for him. He had done a documentary on the same subject years before. But I hope the success of this one propels him to stay. It's a uniquely good entrance into kind of the religious movie space. So I hope he sticks around for a while.
I think that was a fair summary. I was just thinking about how we recently got Escape from Germany as well, right? So we have 2 LDS World War II, specifically Germany films, which like fits into my argument that there are too many World War II films that we need to learn about any other period of history. But it was interesting to compare the two because I feel like this movie has the more interesting source material, right? This is a really interesting and complex story. I feel like Escape from Germany is a little bit more of a fun, like it's a little more enjoyable as a movie. So even though like there were some really good moments in this movie, I feel like it could have been tweaked a little bit more, refined a little bit more so that it really pulled you through and there weren't any moments of confusion. But the source material and the source story is absolutely amazing, of course. So how do you balance those things? That's why we give it 3 ratings.
Yeah, it was interesting because I watched both the movie and then the miniseries, which is just the director's cut of the movie, basically, right? Where they didn't cut anything out. And there were a couple of things that the miniseries added in that I could see why they cut it out. They kind of have humanized the one particular Nazi officer and his family. The kids are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because of all the bombing, things like that. And there is a scene where his excommunication is announced over the pulpit in the miniseries that doesn't exist in the original cut of the movie. And so I wonder if you would have enjoyed the miniseries more, as all such stories are. When you have a little more time to work with, you can make things flow a little bit better. When you're trying to shorten it, you just hit the high points and hope you people string it together well.
This is where I actually kind of want to ask the question, because I think one of the things that I'm both excited about, but also concerned about is we all like to do this thing where we find the heroes and we're like, oh yeah, that was us. That was my track. Like that is just totally the kind of thing we would do. Really thrilled to hear that the filmmakers, and by the way, I also find that there's a group of people that are like, no, just because you remember that there were bad members of the church too who are Nazis. And like I just think that whole thing is really just stupid and silly. What I'm hearing from you is that there was a fair level of honesty and that there was also a desire to say this is a heroic but aspirational figure. And we can embrace that and say, look at the good that he did. And how can we mimic that and follow that without saying that everything is perfect and there were no problems? Like, it's also sounding to me like the cerebral part of my brain is going to enjoy the miniseries more. Is that a fair take on what you're saying?
Probably. I suspect that, I think a miniseries and a movie are actually different genres. And so you just have to keep that in mind. I don't know that you necessarily will like one more than the other. But if you're looking for more nuance, there is more of it, but it's not absent from the movie. And so certainly they spend more time humanizing the Nazis, and his stepfather, who literally adopts him in the miniseries so that he can, so that there's like, I guess, legal ramifications for his trial, whether he's adopted by the stepfather or not. They're able to flesh a few points of that out more, but I don't think either one of them is hero worship. Even the branch president is a little more human. He finds out in the miniseries that Hübener has been using the typewriter and goes to talk with him about it, and they have like a conversation about how dangerous this is for the other members of the congregation. And as one might expect, there are lots of shades of gray, which, when dealing in a movie about the Nazis, I don't know that I personally particularly enjoy. I more enjoy it like Band of Brothers, where it's like, no, let's just go kill all the Nazis. But maybe this is something about my Christianity and, or in this case, lack thereof.
Well, here's the thing. As a kid, I actually wanted Indiana Jones. Like, I need somebody who just punches Nazis. And there's something about that, like, yes, nuance, and that's great. And we need to be honest about history and all of that stuff. But like, it's also just really good to be like, see that guy? He's a good guy. And you know that because he's causing problems for the Nazi people, right? Those are the bad guys in this film. Like, I think it's okay to have those films too. So I'm totally on board.
But it is really interesting in this film to see we have a plot line following the SS investigator who's trying to figure out who is sending these leaflets. And he's not like mustache twirling villain. He's like a boss at an office, and he has coworkers, and he has children, and he has a little girl who he loses in the bombing. And just like, he's a person, and he's a person who's on the wrong side of history. And to be clear, it's not great, but he's also human, which I think is a very Christian thing to do. Even the people who end up on the wrong side of history, who do bad things, are also people. They're not just villains.
And on a pragmatic basis, we're never going to solve the problems of history if we just go, oh, those were just the bad people. Like, I love like the 1950s and 60s in psychology, because it's like, we're going to figure out what's wrong with Germans that made them this way. That's like every experiment that's run in the 1950s and 60s. And then finally somebody's like, oh, maybe it's not their Germanness. Maybe it's not their DNA, and which is so funny on a meta level, because it's like, oh, I think the way we're going to solve eugenics is with eugenics, right? Like, we're going to find the gene that makes people evil. But then we all kind of wake up a little bit and we're like, oh, maybe this is a human issue, right? This is Hannah Arendt's whole point with the banality of evil. And I think it's a really profound one. So again, if this movie ends up being like, these are the bad guys and these are the good guys and there's mustache twirling, there's a place for that. That's okay with me, right? That's what I love about Indiana Jones. On the other hand, if it's a little bit deeper and more nuanced, there are really profound lessons in that too. That doesn't mean we're saying that what they did was okay. What we're saying is the danger is in being human, not in being born in Germany in the 1920s, right?
You know, there's really no question in this film who our protagonists are and who our antagonists are. And yet, like Liz is saying, the antagonists, we're not giving them complicated backstories, right? We're not justifying what they're doing the way that is sometimes popular to sort of give the bad guys a justification or to help us kind of see it from their point of view. It really is just every day, right? The reason they're doing it is it's their job. And I think one of my favorite characters in the film is the branch president, Arthur Zander. And I think he's supposed to come off as villainous, right? He literally kicks the Jews out of the congregation, and obviously he is antagonistic to Helmuth throughout the film. But I get to the end and I'm like, maybe he did what was right, you know, especially what we know now with the way the church is being viewed with suspicion. Like, maybe he saved the lives of the members of his congregation there, and he's trying to muddle through these difficult issues. I wish, probably just because those are the things that interest me, that they had brought in the district president, Otto Berndt, who in history, he didn't co-sign on the excommunication. The branch president had to kind of go around him to try to get that to be done. And I wish we had kind of seen some of his point of view, because he knew Helmuth Hübener. In fact, it was his typewriter, I think, in real life, is the one that he had stolen. He's like, well, I wish I had known what he was doing with him. I would have helped him, I think was his quote. So I wish we had kind of seen that and some of the different ways the leaders were taking it and responding to it. Because Zander obviously took it one way, and obviously, like Liz was saying, did not end up on the right side of history, but certainly is a very sympathetic character. And I wish we had kind of had more people dealing with the same questions he did and maybe coming to different conclusions.
Well, even this idea of the right side of history, which we in 2026 looking back can see that this was something that I enjoyed about Nuremberg, is it shows them showing the footage of the concentration camps to the trial for the first time, and they just dwell on it for like they show the whole thing. I think it's the actual footage that they just stuck into the movie, and it's of course very haunting, but it makes the point that not everybody in Nazi Germany or the controlled things knew what was going on. Like, only when the Allies were marching through and discovering all these concentration camps was the full evil and vulgarity of what was going on apparent. I don't know necessarily how you lose 9 million people, but this was before the internet and everybody has a camera in their phone, and war is crazy with just communication and information flowing. We can look back on it now. And again, Chris, you even mentioned like what we know now about the Latter-day Saints being specifically targeted. I recommended that Latter-day Saint Historical Studies issue where they go through the Nazi Secret Service dossier on the church, where there's literally an SS agent who comes to one of the leaders and says, when we're done with the Jews, we're coming for you next. Like, this is a concern that people had, but it's not obvious to me that everybody knew what had happened to poor Solomon Schwartz, who had been kicked out of the congregation and disappeared and murdered in Auschwitz. So it's interesting to try to look from the point of view of what information they had at the time also, and see them trying to juggle these various competing virtues.
Can I ask on this? Because a friend of mine and I had talked just a couple of weeks ago about how I want to create like a list of great literature that I want my kids to read. And not all of it is going to be great literature. Some of it is just really good stories about good guys and bad guys, right? Like I want that to be a part of their DNA. And a friend of mine actually suggested Truth and Treason. It was like, oh, it's great. You're going to love it. You got to show it to your kids. And I'm like, okay, but like I have a 6-year-old. So like what age? I'm not sure 6 is the right age, but like, is this the kind of thing that is compelling and meaningful, but also tricky enough that there will be conversations and discussions? What would you say in that regard? And I'm not opposed to nuance. I'm also not opposed to a little bit of appropriate historical, tension, graphicness, if you want to call it that, some real suspense and some depictions of what's actually happening. But what was your vibe in terms of what is the right age for folks for this one?
Man, it's really tough. My daughter came in at the beginning, actually, when I was watching it because I was trying to get it done. She was fine watching them like go to church. That was kind of cool. And then like it cuts to a scene with the SS agent beating some guy up, trying to torture information out of him. And that's not something the 9-year-old was ready for. So the violence in this movie, well, it doesn't deal with the Holocaust in any meaningful way. We get like a flash of Solomon being shoved into a train car. And that's it. That's all we get in terms of the Holocaust. But there is a lot of torturing people for information, trying to find out who's behind this leaflet campaign, who's helping you, that kind of violence.
They pull his fingernails off on screen. That's pretty terrible.
I think torture would be the big content warning here. There's a fair bit of it. It's not as graphic as, no, it probably is. 24 is probably the best comparison. It's not as pointless as it was on 24, but I think in terms of graphic level, I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah, that's fair. I certainly at some point want my kids someday, when they're older, like when they're 18, to watch Schindler's List. But I think this movie is PG-13, and I think 13 is the right age for children for this one, just because of the torture, right? Even something like the torture scene from The Princess Bride, right? Like it's bad, but it's kind of played for laughs. But this is like genuine historical, terrible things. I think PG-13 is a good rating, but take the 13 part of it seriously. We don't do that very much in the society anymore, to my daughter's chagrin. I do, to my daughter's chagrin, but I think 13 would be the way to go with that.
I think the other element of it that I would want to be aware with kids is the idea that we have very complicated discussions that are going to come out of it in terms of the role of faith, the role of church leaders. And I think, especially for younger children, 6 years old, I think you want to create a simpler version of authority. And I don't know that a simple version of authority really survives a good watching of this film. And so I'm with Carl. I don't know that I would show it to my 6 and 9-year-old. My 11-year-old, I'm like thinking, maybe not quite yet. But, like I could imagine watching it with him. So yeah, I think 13 really is a good guess, at least for my kids.
It's funny because like I've started realizing that one of the things that's really meaningful, we're trying to build in our family like coming of age rituals. And one of the most meaningful is just like, you're old enough to be trusted with this kind of a movie. And then I get to have the conversation of, and here's why, and here's how you need to treat it. And it's almost like being able to use a knife at dinner, like one of the sharp steak knives. It's like, you can use this, you need to respect that it's a sharp knife, and you've got to give it the respect it deserves. In the same way, I want to build that as a culture in our family where it's like, there are a few movies you just shouldn't watch. But most movies, it's about, do you have the maturity? Do you know how to understand it? Do you know how to attack it the right way? And I think there's a lot in that could be really lovely. So that is super helpful. I might watch it first, then watch it with my 13-year-old, and then we'll wait on the other kids.
Yeah, I just started watching Star Trek The Next Generation with my 9-year-old daughter, and it's perfect. I wish we were doing videos so you could all see Chris putting his arms up in the air. Huzzah!
I'm very excited for you and your 9-year-old.
It's been way fun, and we've only watched like 3 episodes, and I'm like, oh, I forgot how good this show is. But to discuss moral themes in an appropriate way that a 9-year-old can grasp, right? But it's not over-nuancing, and a healthy view of leadership and authority, I think, exists in the Star Trek universe, at least in the ones we've watched so far.
That's a winner right there. But the other side of this is when I was a kid, I was like, this is great. They go to space and they blow stuff up. And now I'm like, man, the social commentary was so heavy-handed. And I did not catch a lick of it. I was just like, oh yeah, what do you do if there's a big propaganda machine? And what do I do when there are cyborgs that are trying to rob you of your individuality? I did not get the joke. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's genius, right? It's just, I love it. Like there's something very visceral to like, oh, I know what the right thing to do is here. It's very much like fairy tales for big kids. And I think there's something really cool about that.
So let's talk about the choice that Hübener makes in this film, because it's brought up several times when people find out what he's doing. They're like, did you think about how this is endangering all the people around you? Did you think about how listening to this radio in your home means your mother could be brought in for questioning and she was not consulted on this decision? And similarly with the branch president. So I'm interested in talking about like, this is a tough thing. Like, what is the right thing to do when you know something is wrong but is dangerous to speak out? How do you know if it's right for you to do it and put other people at risk? Because one of the interesting things about this story is that it started out as a play at BYU, right, in the 70s, and then it gets canceled at BYU, and everybody's up in arms about it. But the reason they canceled it is because they were worried about the church members who were living under Soviet Russia. It was very, very touch and go for the church over there, and they wanted their members to be able to keep going to church and not be arrested and sent to Siberia. So they were like, we're not going to put on this play. We don't want to encourage this. And now that the Cold War's over, the play's come back. It was produced at a high school in St. George recently. It's just interesting thinking about, is it morally wrong to be politically strategic in a place where there is good and evil, like, and you know it?
Well, and part of the concern here also is that we are such a minority religion, like, because this, like, we are recording on April 9th, like just a couple days ago, the Free Press released that thing where some undersecretary from the Department of Defense, the Department of War, like brought the Vatican guy in and sort of chewed him out if these reports are to be believed. And the Pope is just like, no, I'm the Pope. I run 1 billion Catholics. I'm the vicar of Christ. I will not be intimidated by you, because he's the Pope. He literally has his own country that he now rules. And that is just a very different sort of set of circumstances. So I can look at that and have holy envy for the way he can be like morally clear. But is that a function of our minority status? Or is that a function of how Christ himself would function, who didn't go after Rome specifically, even though they were way more oppressive than like anything going on today? But Christ didn't go after them. He just said, no, serve your neighbor and love everybody, even your enemies. And these are tensions that I hold in my hand. I have holy envy for the Pope's ability to speak with moral clarity, and yet I don't feel like I find that example in the life of the Lord and Savior whom we both ostensibly try to serve.
It was interesting. The other day in class, I always end my semester on AMA Day, Ask Me Anything. And somebody asked me, they were like, tell us what you really believe politically. And I said, I will. And I've thought a lot about this. Be 95% less political. Love your neighbor more. Serve your neighbor more. Love your family. Be a decent human. And then go and vote like it really matters. But the other 95% is probably going to keep you sane. And they didn't like that. And they were, and I don't like it either. And I was like, I'm super political. I have opinions on everything. But there is something right now where it's almost a powerlessness where it's like, it gives me space within my narrow sphere to say, but I did everything I knew how to do. And what I had the power to do was very small. But what I had control over, what little patch of the vineyard was mine, I cultivated to the best of my ability. My kids, my family, my neighbors. And, when I have an opportunity to make a difference that's big and national, I try and do that. But it's hard. It's complicated. So to your point, I like what you said, Carl. This is a deeply unsettling feeling that I don't know how to make sense of, except to say, I think that I'm trying my best to do what Jesus would tell me to do. And that's going to have to be enough for now.
One of my favorite parts of the film was that Hübner was really portrayed as brave, but he was also really portrayed like a child, which one is nice because he was a child. I mean, they executed a child, but also we do see it in how short-sighted he is and how excitable he is and how he kind of makes these decisions without any of the moral calculus or the political weight that you would expect an adult to. And there is something about being like this child that is admirable, and you want to be reminded of that and of those ideals. But also we see some of the trouble that he caused for the people around him. I think in terms of bringing it back to our current culture and what we do, it's interesting because I live in Nevada right now, and Nevada has a very interesting kind of place in the Latter-day Saint diaspora where, like you're saying, Carl, we're a very small minority in most of the world. And so the political sway we can have there is null. Right? Really, our best bet, if we're trying to bring people the ordinances of salvation, is to do exactly like Christ did, which is render unto Caesar's, or as I would say, sit down and shut up, right? And then in Utah, you see where the church has huge influence and often weighs in on issues of moral importance, such as the fairness for all. And so they are using that authority in the small area they have. It's interesting being here where about 10% of the population is Latter-day Saint and seeing how the church operates because they do use this influence for good in a lot of ways. We are a lot more active and participatory with other faiths in political movements than I ever have when I had lived in California or in Texas or in New York. It's like those places we had so few. And so it's been interesting kind of being here and seeing so much of what we do is about building relationships with the people who wield power through service and through working together for the community, and then utilizing those relationships to try to influence them for good. So it's kind of interesting seeing the church operating in three different ways and kind of these three different spheres. And I think there's certainly a wisdom to each of those ways, and maybe it's the right approach for each one, but yeah.
I really like that. I think you're right that like one of the best things about this film is seeing that this kid is 16. And there's a reason that a lot of freedom fighters and revolutionaries are teenagers and young adults, because they have, first of all, the audacity, and second of all, like the lack of connection to be able to say, do what is right, let the consequence follow. And once you become enmeshed in a community like Ben is talking about, and you have a family, you have neighbors, and everything you do has implications, your freedom of action is somewhat limited by the fact that you are in a community and everything you do has repercussions to all the people around you. It's fascinating to me. This movie shows both the bravery and the just admirableness of what he did, and also just the foolhardiness of just being like, I'm going to print out some anti-Nazi flyers and distribute them in the neighborhood. And I'm not going to think any further than that. Like, I have no plan. I have no long-term strategy. I'm just going to print some stuff.
You know, I found myself watching the film weighing the wisdom of what he was doing. And I kept thinking, look at how talented he was. Look at how brave he was. Look at what a great writer he was. And he obviously made a huge difference in his small community, and it has resonated for generations. So his life was certainly well lived. And I wonder what his impact would have been had he made a different choice. Was that the right choice? Did he make the most difference that he could have in making the world a better place? And I struggled to answer that question. I don't know that it was, which is hard to say for something that's so brave in the face of so much difficulty, but I'm not sure that he couldn't have made a bigger difference if he had been more circumspect in this decision.
I mean, that's why the movie ends with a quote from Alexei Navalny, who he has since been killed, a Russian dissident, and is obviously making ties between what Helmuth Hübener did in Nazi Germany in the 1940s and what Navalny was doing until his demise in the Russian gulag system that exists right now. And it's interesting because at the same time that I look at the Pope's ability to be just morally courageous and speak out because nobody's going to come for him. It's not going to happen. I feel like Tevye in the Fiddler on the Roof, right? On the other hand, right? One of the most striking books and I reread it recently, it's called The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, that shows how this little tiny minority Christian sect, it starts off as a tiny Jewish sect, can grow to overtake the Roman Empire in the space of a couple of centuries simply by living its values, by helping people when there are plague victims, by not exposing and murdering children, right? Like infant women, by treating everybody as a child of God, worthy of human dignity, just tending to your little parts of the vineyard, like Ben said, can eventually grow and become a major force in the world for good. And so I hold these two things in tension. If they're going to take your Jewish ministering brother and ship him off to be murdered, I feel like just doing your ministering is not an appropriate moral response to that. And yet I recognize the power of just doing your ministering as a way of changing civilization slowly over time. I don't know how to balance those in whatever current circumstance you find yourself.
I want to add to this because I think this is a really important point. I had a friend when Antifa was all that you ever read about. There were two friends that were arguing I think it was on my Facebook page. And one was basically saying, well, I'm Antifa because I'm going to punch a Nazi. And the other one was saying, you're a bunch of crazy people that want to burn everything down and riot. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. Why am I even here? But the one that was saying we should all punch Nazis, I was like, and who is a Nazi? It's almost the flip of, and who is my brother, the Samaritan, right? And it's whoever I don't like right now. The amazing thing to me is the amount of wisdom required that so many people miss to go, something about this is wrong. And even when my community is against me, something is still wrong here, and I need to do something about it. So as much as he may not have had the discernment to realize, hey, maybe be a little bit less foolish, which I'm very much on board with. I think the Lord expects us to use our brains. I also think there's a matter of moral courage, which is not very popular to talk about today, that is just a shining bright example of you need to say the thing sometimes. You need to take some arrows. It might make people mad and you still have an obligation to say it. But as I admire him for the moral courage, I also admire him for looking around and going, oh, this is bad. And a lot of people, I think between tribe and institution and all of the reasons where it's but I'm the only one saying that it's bad, so maybe I'm the crazy person. This is why when somebody does say something crazy at church or in my community, I'm like, we need a few crazies, right? There's something healthy about that. And I need to actually listen every once in a while and be like, well, hold on, let's just make sure, because I don't think we always see it. And I'm going to weigh in just a little bit politically just for a second. Things have been so nutsy over the last 12 years in American politics. And I'm not even saying bad or good. I'm just saying unusual, that it's hard to keep my bearings on what normal is. And I don't know what every once in a while I'll freak out about something and somebody will be like, you're always freaking out. And I was like, at what point should I? Isn't there a point at which I should be concerned? Isn't there a point at which I should go, this is not normal. I don't know what to do with this. And there are people, it's a type 1, type 2 error p-value question. I am setting my p-value here. And when something goes below that, I'm going to freak out and go, something's weird. And maybe I do that too much, but it's a whole lot better than never doing it at all. That was the nerdiest comparison I have ever said publicly. I am so sorry.
I'm proud of you, Ben. I really am. I thought during the film and how much of what he did was inspired by the BBC broadcast he was getting. And as I was thinking about the question of how do you justify, this, or how do you make these kinds of decisions? Or how could I apply this example today? How the sources of information that we're getting kind of impacts our behavior, and we need to do a good job of getting information that there is some level of moral implication of, are you getting good quality information? Because the people sitting beside Hübener who didn't have any of that information, why would they have made a similar choice? They didn't know what was going on. And so he is making this decision about what he needed to do based on this. And so if I'm in a position where I'm thinking, hey, do I need to, lead an insurrection? Do I need to go engage in some kind of civil disobedience? I think the first check that you always have to have is, am I getting good information? Am I basing this decision on things that are true? Am I still getting my local newspaper, right? Am I a victim of the algorithm that I'm being fed in the social media feeds I frequent? And until we're asking ourselves those questions, I don't think we're in a good position to really say, hey, I want to take a moral stance where I may be engaging in some kind of civil disobedience, because it's too risky if you don't have good information.
And tagging on to that, it's the combination of the BBC broadcast and that he has access to all these banned books, right? The great books of the world. And so, like, it's a combination of good information about now and also timeless information and, like, the ability to build up that critical thinking skill that, like, not everything exists within this window of the last 5 years, the last 12 years where things have been crazy. Like, being able to compare across time and know that, like, the moral errors that we've got going on today are different than the moral errors of hundreds of years ago, and being able to match those things up. So I think it's a powerful combination of having good news media and having a liberal education with knowledge widely across many disciplines.
I have to weigh in here on this because I think you both have articulated something that whenever I say, people look at me weird. And I think it's because of the Holocaust. I am very much pro-propaganda. I think propaganda is needed, and I think we need more of it. It needs to be more emotionally compelling. And C.S. Lewis makes this beautiful case where he goes, if you simply rely on rationality, you have made men without chests. This is a great little essay that he writes, and I tell it to my students every semester. When we unilaterally cease to use emotion, think about what would have happened if the BBC broadcasts aren't reaching, right, the heroes that would be. Think about what happens when you don't have access to all of those things. Rationality isn't enough. And to be clear, that freaks people out because they know the propaganda has some baggage, and it should have some baggage, and that should freak you out too. And that means you need to be wise enough to know, when are they using it to control you and dominate you and manipulate you? And when are they trying to appeal to the best angels inside your nature to say, somebody has to stop this, and we're in Britain and we can't, but you might be able to. And by the way, it's going to come at the cost of your life. And I think there is something about cultivating a sense of moral virtue and decency and courage and all of those things. And if I can be frank, is one of the reasons why I love my job, because I don't have to tiptoe around that. And when I was in public schools, I did. And I'm not just talking about God. I'm not saying religion. I'm saying morality, right? The idea that you are raised to be a moral person, to contribute to your society, to do what is right and not what is wrong, is incredibly controversial in K-12. I don't have to play that game at BYU, Idaho. I can say you are here to become better people, and I darn well expect you to be. And that to me is both thrilling and also very weighty, right? Like, I am always scared when I walk into my classroom to realize that's the weight that students are putting on me. And that I tell them up front, I am going to use emotion in every way I can to try to make you into a better person. I'll try and do it transparently. I'll try and do it thoughtfully and deliberately. I'll try and use your agency as well. I'll try to do it in a cooperative way as I can. I'm not trying to brainwash at you. I'm trying to help you brainwash yourself almost. But the idea that I would just present stale information and that you're going to become a better person has never resonated with me.
I love this, where we've gone with this the last few minutes, about the combination of having good local immediate information from good sources. Ben, I gotta tell you, from one of my favorite political commentators, always ends with, just remember, you are not the crazy ones. I love it. And I smile a little bit every time he says that. Combined with timeless virtues. And it's just so interesting to think of, like, someone else that I have holy envy for as far as, like, church operating in society, or like the Black Baptists of the civil rights era, right? Who went out and marched on bridges and got their heads beaten in by billy clubs and had dogs gnaw on them. But when they finally did it publicly, like the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and it was broadcast everywhere, that's when the rest of America kind of went, oh, snap. I didn't realize that that's what was going on in the South. This is terrible. And kind of goes back to my point about the Holocaust, how it wasn't even obvious at the time. It was only after the war, when the Russians and the Americans found all of these camps, that we finally realized the evil that was going on. Nobody knew that. Eisenhower did not know that when we were planning the D-Day invasion. Like, information is so critical in order to make your moral choices. And I'm glad one of the more recent updates to the Church Handbook of Instructions did say, like, make sure you're getting your information from good and I forget exactly how it phrases it. You can go look it up. Good and worthy news sources, because that's so important, especially today in the world of so much information, so much misinformation. I don't know. Anyway, I wonder how many people think they're going to fake Artemis 3's moon landing, but whatever.
Oh dear. Yes. I was going to go one more place from the book that Ben was quoting from, Abolition of Man, which is C.S. Lewis's best work. Honestly, I love it so much. But one of the things he talks about is who is immune to propaganda. Number one is the people who have read enough good literature and things and had good emotions drilled into them so that they can recognize the false ones. But then the other people who are immune to propaganda is the people who don't consume any information and they don't see it. And I worry that that's a place where the last decade of craziness in American politics, that's where some of my students are right now, because I teach persuasive writing. I ask them to write a political paper. And it's always fascinating to me that a fourth of my class, juniors and seniors at BYU, do not have any political opinions that they feel like they want to bother defending. Their reaction to the environment that we're in right now is just to shut down and not consume any information and not have any opinions and not talk about it, because that's how we be polite people. And so I think that's clearly also the wrong approach. Being too engaged in the 24-hour news cycle is not healthy for us, but completely disengaging, also very unhealthy for us. It makes us immune to propaganda, but it also makes us immune to the good and the true and the beautiful. We just are immune to everything because we're invisible.
I think one of the things that's going to become increasingly important as misinformation has now been multiplied through the abilities of AI to create and distribute it is learning to find people that we trust. Who do we trust to get us good information? Who do we trust to mold our emotions in ways that is going to set us in good directions? And I think it gets to one of the other big questions I had from this is the relationship of Helmut and his branch president and how much he could rely on the advice that he gave him. And I think one of the hard things about this for me is that his branch president was giving him advice that maybe was the right advice for the branch president to give, but maybe it wasn't the right advice for Hübener to hear, right? Maybe he needed to do something different. And I promised an Elantris tie-in, so here's where I'll do it. There's a religion in the East, and it's very hierarchical in this book. And basically, in order to be kind of fully apart, you need to connect yourself to someone higher in the hierarchy. But there's two ways of doing it. One is called an ODiv, where you basically swear your loyalty and obedience to this person, that you will do whatever they say. And the other one is called a Krondit, or I don't know how we would pronounce that, which is basically that you owe your loyalty to this person and that you will always hear them out, that you will always consider their point of view faithfully and honestly in making your own decisions. And I felt like, okay, that's exactly the kind of relationship I always want to have with my local leaders, where I am loyal to them honestly, where I always want to hear them out, but not to the point where it can become the manipulation. I thought that was a very interesting kind of distinction there, and I thought it really played over here to the kind of the wisdom of how that relationship went.
It was interesting. The other day in my class, on my AMA day, one of my students asked me, they said, so you've taught us about studies, and then you told us that you can't rely on a study, and then you told us you can't rely on a meta-analysis, and then you told us that you can't rely on the consensus. What are we supposed to believe? And I was like, yeah, man, truth is hard. It sucks. Get a helmet. I don't know what to tell you. It was just kind of this funny moment where they finally got what I've been telling them all semester long. It's good generals have to act on 70% information. You got to learn how to trust good people and understand that you're never going to have it all and still have the courage to act in the meantime. And that is really scary and really hard. And welcome to the hard that is life. And that's a very normal thing. And so, yeah, I'm totally on board with that message of we have to have the moral courage. So Liz, you said something that was so compelling to me. The issue with some writers is not that they don't know how to be persuasive. It's that they do not have the moral fortitude to say that they have anything worth saying because it might offend someone. Nathaniel Gibbons has said this. He's a common friend of all of ours. He's like, most people who say nice isn't the same as kind, they're probably not nice or kind, right? Most of the time, that's just cover for I'm just a jerk, right? And every time he says it, I'm like, man, 9 times out of 10, he is exactly right. Now let me be that guy that says, I actually think that a lot of us think we're being kind when really we're just protecting reputation. that were actually just saying, I don't want to make anybody mad. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to upset anybody. There is Christ-like attributes include mercy and kindness and benevolence. It also includes courage. It also includes rocking the boat. It also, read your New Testament, folks. This is a real part of what it means to be a disciple. And the hard part is you got to have the wisdom to figure out what's a mountain and what's a molehill. And I'm not going to pretend I've even got that figured out.
This might be getting a little too religious, but we are a podcast mostly run by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But President Nelson's quote, "In the coming days, it will not be possible to survive spiritually without the guiding, directing, comforting, and constant influence of the Holy Ghost. So you guys got to cultivate that in your life because it's going to get messier." Just with AI itself, with the wackiness of the last little while in American politics and the different people. I was listening to an interesting podcast with David French, who's sort of one of my political commentators that I enjoy. He said he showed his students in his American history class the first debate between Obama and Romney. And he said, "So what were your impressions?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea they were such good friends." And it was just so interesting that was the reaction of these children who were probably 8 years old when that happened, right? It wasn't part of their consciousness at the time. And then to be reintroduced to that, I found that really amusing. You got to get some good people to latch onto. And for my money, it should be the brethren and the other leaders of the church who do things like don't give an inch on, say, gay marriage, but will happily have the DC Gay Men's Chorus come sing at the Temple Visitor Center and make friends with these people and do the Fairness for All initiative and try to be genuine peacemakers even though we disagree. There's something there that I think they're setting a good example on. Even if I sort of think that if we were literally living in Nazi Germany, that would be inadequate because there are some people who are not going to make common cause with you. I don't think we're there yet in America. I don't know we ever will be. But that does seem to be a good example to follow in our current circumstances.
No, but you've raised something that I've thought about, and I want to be really, really clear here before I dive in. I do not critique my religious leaders publicly. I don't think it's the right thing to do. Frankly, I think even critiquing my political leaders, we've made it into its own religion, and I really do have issues with that. I think, there's such a thing as the loyal opposition, but we're now trained to hate the other side before they've even come out the gate. I think you articulated it really well. I love what senior leaders of the church have done. I think they have preached the right principles in ways that are absolutely essential. And there is a part of me that sometimes wishes that they would be even more direct and that they would speak up on issues. And they have in the past, and it has cost them. I suspect it has cost them personally. I know that it has cost the church in some circumstances. I think there's something beautiful about that. There's something hard about that. The times when they have spoken up, there have been times when I've had to reevaluate and I've had to look in the mirror and say, am I actually living in that way? I do just want to, and I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to say this because I've fake run a podcast with, all 10 listeners. I've loved running. It's been really fun, but nobody likes listening to civility. It's just not a thing. It does not go viral, right? That is a core issue that we have with civility. And maybe what we need to do is market it a little bit more clearly to say, if all civility is being nice and staying out of the headlines, you're probably doing it wrong sometimes. There actually does have to be a component of standing up, saying the thing, and doing it really, really well. That isn't this, fake pretense of I'm doing what MLK did because I punched my neighbor because he disagreed with me. He voted for the wrong person. So I'm, being a nonviolent opposition or, some dumb thing that you hear on Facebook all the time. Having said that, I think civility means kindness, decency, peacemaking, seeing the best in other people. And I do want to just say really quick to back up the leaders of the church. When we talk about peacemaking, I don't think it's just be nice. I think that you can find, and I show some of these slides in my class, you will find that Latter-day Saints see other people as human beings in different ways. I think in part because we serve missions, because we sing, I am a child of God. Oh, and that probably means something about everybody I interact with too, right? That we don't view the immigrant as a threat in the same way, even if we have very strong feelings about immigration, probably on both sides. There is a difference among the average Latter-day Saint that I think is beautiful and worth noting. And I think in some sense that comes from a lot of what we've been taught, what we've been preached to about, what my general leaders have taught me. And that to me is beautiful. At the same time, if any general authority is listening or any apostle is wondering if we'll sustain them, if they push the envelope, I'm just saying absolutely yes. And if I need to go home and pray about it a little bit, that's just fine. That's something I'll take care of. But I want you to know that I sustain you when you take the risks. And if we come out a little bit bruised for it, I'd rather that we make a mistake or two, trying to do what is right in the right circumstances.
One thing I just want to add to your list of reasons why Latter-day Saints are so different, I find something that has really affected my view of humanity as a whole is the fact that we do so much work for the dead in languages where we are clearly butchering these Korean people's names. But those people who lived in Korea 400 years ago, they matter to God, and that is important to us. And I think the things we do in the temple give me a perspective that I wouldn't otherwise. I don't know where I would get that perspective in the same way as readily. The other one, of course, in the temple is that you have to have kind feelings towards everybody if you'd like to participate in a part of the ceremony. If you don't have kind feelings, that's a you problem, because I'm pretty sure Jesus would stand at a prayer circle with literally everybody who ever lived. And so these are things that I think the temple gives us.
I always have a code with my wife to let her know if I can participate in the prayer circle, given who's participating in that session. So maybe that's some repenting for me to do.
Well, I do want to back up those of us who are like, could I stand in the circle with everybody? I don't want to go too far into this, but I think it is worth noting that the unity is not unity at all costs. There is something that brings us together, and it's a commitment to covenants that we share. And in that context, I think I have an obligation to surrender whatever feelings I might have. If somebody is actually saying, nah, I just think certain people shouldn't exist, it's going to be really hard for me to stand in that circle. That's not going to happen because that's a fundamental part of what that circle represents. And actually, I think, so Carl, to your point about names in the temple and baptisms, I have a similar one. And I did not actually put this together in my head. There were two places growing up where I saw this, and one was Sesame Street and one was in church publications. It's people with disabilities. And I remember the church got an award for being inclusive. And I saw it and I was like, what are you talking about? They're just showing regular people. And then I started processing through most TV shows that I saw. And I was like, not one wheelchair, not one Down syndrome person, not one person who's out of the norm. Everyone looks the same. And then I opened up my end sign and I was like, oh my gosh, it's right there. This is personal to me because my sister has Down syndrome. And I was just blown away. I was like, this is a big deal because these people matter to me. This is my sister. These are people that are in my life that in some circumstances are hidden, are a shame for us. I don't know. I just found that to be really surprisingly poignant, I guess. And that's the kind of modeling that I think happens subtly and quietly in church. It's a very normal thing that I don't think I would give credit for. If I was a normal family without a church, and without a Kiwanis club, I would be like, I just wouldn't see it in the same way that I have because I get to be a primary teacher or I get to be an elders quorum or I get to think about the man in my ward who is unemployed right now. It forces the humanity issue.
So I just want to wrap up something from what Chris was talking about and participating in, the temple prayer circle. Would you feel comfortable standing in a prayer circle with Arthur Zander or Otto Berendt, one way or the other? These are the questions that I think the teachings of Jesus Christ force us to confront. Because it doesn't say you have to agree with everybody in the prayer circle politically. It does say you can't have unkind feelings towards them. Unpack that in your own personal discipleship. It's complicated.
And I think it's supposed to be complicated. I think it's supposed to be hard. If we take things like this seriously, it is not supposed to be easy. We too often tell these parables and stories that Jesus told about these difficult situations in such an easy and obvious way. Oh, of course you stop and help the Samaritan. But do you? Can you stop and help that person? I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast. There's a show I used to love, which you can't watch anymore. I don't think it's streaming anywhere, but Joan of Arcadia, fantastic show. Very mad that they didn't get another season. But one of the plot lines in the show is that her mom was raped in her teens, in her young adult years, and the rapist gets out of jail and asks to see her and asks for her forgiveness and apologizes, and the mom refuses to forgive him. Watching this scene in the basement of my dorm at BYU, because that's where the TV was, and having somebody else just be really mad that they would ask this of this person. But honestly, that's what Jesus asks of all of us. And it's not easy. It's not easy to forgive someone. And it should be. But we have to.
And the terrible, terrible weight of forgiving without condoning, of saying what you have done is awful and horrible, and justice sometimes needs doing. And at the same time, it is significantly less emotional than your example is, which is such a tender one. But I think about the Taliban, and I remember a commentator just saying, if you don't want anybody in the Taliban to have a place in the future government, then you don't understand. You don't understand how Afghanistan works. You don't understand that it's everyone. You will not have a civil society. You will not be able to move forward. And that like there has to be space for mercy on a pragmatic basis. We're not even getting into a moral basis. Just like we need those people and we need them to come back. I think that is a terribly hard thing for us to wrestle with. Going back to Star Trek of like, at what point does somebody become irredeemable? I don't know. I think it is okay to say we have to reach for both mercy and grace, and at the same time, justice and fairness and accountability. And to maximize both of those is a balance that I never feel like I can quite get right.
Well, that's why the commandment is, I, the Lord, will forgive whom I will forgive, but of you it is required to forgive all men. And as I understand the math, I'm just a theologian, right? I've made this joke before. We can't even count to 3. All is 100%. And that is rough. And yet, what the Lord said to Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Well, and I will say, and this is where, I don't know, the church in the last 20 years, I think, has made a very deliberate effort to go in the direction of mercy and grace and kindness and forgiveness. I trust the leaders of my church that if that's the direction they want to go, I will be fully on board and full-throatedly defend that. And at the same time, some people have been surprised they haven't gone even further. I know of people who have said, why even have, it used to be excommunication and now it has a different name. And, we've done some of that stuff. And people said, why do churches even need to get involved in that in the first place? And I said, because evil's real and because it's a thing. And because some level of trying, even though it's an imperfect proxy for actual truth and justice, is probably still worth doing in a way that isn't the criminal law system, right? That is some kind of informal, we recognize that there are bad things that people can do that should not be involved only with police powers. And that is probably a better world. We probably live in a better world despite the fact that we don't catch all the bad guys, and we probably sometimes catch good guys that get mislabeled. That is still a worthy and right thing to do because balancing justice and mercy is really, really tricky. And so my private opinion is I am really glad that the church has moved in the direction it has. I am also glad that it has made very clear that some aspect of being a Latter-day Saint means stepping up. It means stepping to the plate and saying, I have obligations. I need to be a decent human. That is a part of my Christianity as well.
I know we're going long, but I want to bring one more thing up. It's Martin Luther King Jr. To go back to the role of the church and of religious people in politics. I loved that Martin Luther King Jr. in a couple of instances talked about the parable of the Good Samaritan. But he said, obviously we should all stop on the road and help the Samaritan. But is it not also incumbent on us to make sure that there are patrols on the road and maybe some lights and flatten it so that it's easier to travel and make sure there aren't as many places for bandits and robbers to hide? How do you help a situation? You could all help at the individual level, but can we not also push for things on the societal or civilizational level? Or, we got local elections, we got state elections, we got federal elections, we got, there's a lot of tiers here in America, at least specifically. I'm just curious if any of you have thoughts on that in the context of, especially because we are a democracy. Helmuth Hübener did not have this option available to him. He was 16, he wouldn't have been able to vote anywhere. And like the members of our church in China do not have votes. I wanted to get people's thoughts on that sort of approach as well. Like, what's the difference between the local and maybe all the way up to the civilizational in the context of our involvement in society as religious people?
So there are 2 thoughts that pop into my head. The first one is, as Americans, we're very quick to identify people. Like every problem is a people problem. It's either a hero or a villain, right? It's just very expressive individualist. It's like, just find the good guy and reward him and find the bad guy and punish him and everything will work out okay. But that neglects, I think, the system problem, right? Where good people who are police officers who believed in hierarchy and authority are all of a sudden putting people into extermination camps because they are used to this proxy for morality being, well, I just listen to my superiors and everything works okay. And then I get rewarded and everybody works fine. Think that there needs to be a conversation about, do the systems work? And what do we do when they don't? And how do we investigate those? I think it also gives me an immense amount of sympathy, I guess, just it makes my heart break for people who were good but naive and ended up doing horrors. I love Jonathan Haidt. I look at the 5 moral foundations. I cannot unsee the world through that lens, having read Righteous Mind. And I look at this and go, I like authority. I like loyalty. And I'm decently big on purity, right? I think we should treat our bodies with respect and things like that. What in that would have protected me from a very strong man ruler who is an authoritarian? And this is something that keeps me up at night, that freaks me out, I think we need to look at what are the things that appeal to us and how can it be used really poorly and get us into a really dark and dangerous place. Those are the moral antibodies that we need to be activating. We need to be, inoculating ourselves against. So in the first place, I think it is, a friend of mine worked at Toyota and he said, maybe they fire people, but their first impression is not to go, there was a problem with the car. Who's the engineer? Let's fire them. It's where was the systems breakdown so we can identify where that system broke, fix the incentives, and then allow the good people to do the right thing, because it is almost always a systems problem. And I think that's one thing that I'm excited to see in this film. I think we've kind of all started to grapple with the Nazi issue as being a problem of systems. I want to see how we deal with the heroism issue of what is the kind of system that creates morally good people that have courage, that want to make the world better. I had a second thought, but I got too excited about Toyota. So if I remember in a minute, I'll cut you off. But that was the one I remembered.
To your broader question, Carl, absolutely. We have an obligation as Christians, as Latter-day Saints, to use our political influence, which includes our vote, but also includes the letters we write, the people we go see, the relationships we build, in a way that is going to produce good for the most people. But those are extraordinarily complicated questions. I think the idea of trying to fix things on a systems level appeals to me. But I know people who very much feel like the most effective way is to let other non-governmental bodies be the one who kind of address those things. I certainly don't begrudge them those conclusions in terms of how to exercise their political will.
That was very much the second point I was going to make, Christopher. You introed it beautifully. And that is that I think people do this thing where they very much airbrush Martin Luther King in particular to fit their own political preferences. And I think that's a little bit offensive. I want to really note that he really believed very strongly in government action for the poor. And I am not on that bandwagon, but it's not because I disagree. And I think he and I would, I suspect, get along just fine, right? I don't think I would be his political nemesis. I wouldn't be like, curse him. I think it would be, man, come and take my econ class. Let me tell you about what happens when centralized power grows really big. There's a guy named Hitler that can teach you a lot of stories about what happens when all of a sudden a social security program is hawked to people, because all of a sudden it's going to give me power and it's going to look really, like, I'm not saying social security is evil. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is there are good reasons to be on the side of limited government, of libertarianism, of even if it is efficient for government to do, maybe we shouldn't let them do it because it can create other problems down the line. Having said that, because I'm one of those that's like, man, I wish we had a private philanthropic industry. I wish that the Bishop Storehouse would replace most of American welfare in the United States in 2026. I think that'd be a huge gift to the country. And frankly, I think if I can be so modest about ourselves, I think we would administer the stupid thing a whole lot better. But that to the side, I think if people are in common cause around, we care about the people, we want to see them better off, we want to create better life outcomes for them, I'm going to get along with anybody, even if we disagree on some of the economic policy minutia. The question for me is, are you wise enough to see that your own plan probably has problems? Are you kind enough to want what is best for other people? And are you open enough to talk to me so that we can try and have some level of dialogue so you can learn when there are mistakes? If so, I'm just not worried about it, right? Bad welfare programs are going to get caught pretty quickly, and we'll try new things and it'll just be iterative. It's when people are really stubborn or not actually good people that things become big problems.
I wonder if my question is one uniquely suited for those living in a democracy, because as I said before, right, I highly recommend Rodney Stark's book on how Christianity, just by tending to their little corners of the vineyard, can end up taking over the Roman Empire, which was way worse than anything that's going on in any nation right now. Like, we don't, like, routinely crucifying people on the Appian Way, right? Like, this is not a thing. But yet Christianity took it over in a couple hundred years just by doing good works. But they didn't have any other choices. We, in a democracy, from persuasion, friendship, votes, things like, we can be more involved on the societal level questions. It's something we all have to figure out how to balance all these virtues. And I think we ought to be recognized that we are very blessed to be able to have that kind of input on what our society is like.
Carl, to your point, and I want to say this really clearly, I actually think that you're exactly right, that we do have some obligation. I love what Joseph Smith said. Once a man has received salvation, he will not be happy until he saves his family. And once he has received salvation for his family, he will go walking across the nation, doing everything he can to save his community and his country, right? I think that is the right order in which to do it, where it's like, get your own house in order first. But I also think that good Latter-day Saints, listen, your vote counts for 5 votes. You know why? Because you actually show up to vote. And if it's a 20% voting rate, then you can have a much bigger difference. So show up, go to primaries. Don't let them be run by crazy people. Show up and just say normal things. You look like $1,000,000 standing next to the psychopaths. So I really am a fan of that kind of like get involved. I just think I have kids and it's hard, and I don't think I should feel super guilty about that. But I absolutely think that God is going to ask me how I voted, and I don't think he'll care that much about it, but I think he'll care a little bit. And I want to be able to give him a pretty solid answer.
All right. This has been, I think, like our best podcast ever. So thank you for that. I'm not going to edit this one down as much as I do. This has all been fantastic. So thank you. But let's close out with our rating segments. We do our 3 ratings as usual. We have our first one, content, clean versus objectionable material, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, outer darkness. What do people think about this one? I'll go first. Because there is all of the torture scenes, and they're literally pulling 4 Hübener's fingernails off, I think I'm going to give this one a telestial. This is very much the world in which we now live, and like the worst parts of the world in which we now live. And that's not even, that they barely even showed anything about the Holocaust. And so I think I'm going to give it telestial. This is a heavy movie because of some of the content. So that's mine. We'll just go around the horn. Chris, what do you think about content rating?
You know, I had to go to your website to look at them because I was feeling like there's not even this movie that I think is morally indefensible to include. Like, all those scenes are hard, but I think they really contribute to the story. But it's certainly not appropriate for all ages. So I was falling in the terrestrial range in terms of the content.
I think I'll go terrestrial as well, just because this isn't Schindler's List. This isn't Life is Beautiful in terms of where you can go with a World War II movie. It's pretty mild, but not Boy in the Striped Pajamas mild. Okay, so we're like one step up from that, right? So we'll put terrestrial on it.
And I haven't seen it, so I'm going to defer to all of you.
All right, and our second rating is artistic merit, skillful, effective use of craft, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. Liz will have you lead out on this one.
For me, the first 45 minutes, I had a really hard time focusing on, and I think it's just, it moves a little slow. It's hard to keep track of all the characters, and there's not like a really strong plot until we get to the first leafleting. And then there's tension all the way through the second half of the movie. So I can't say like it's the best film ever. I did think that Escape from Germany is probably more compelling as a movie about Latter-day Saints in Germany. So I'm going to give it like 3 popcorn balls.
That's fair. It's actually been a couple months since I watched it, because I watched this in December and it's now April. But I wonder, my recollection is that the tension in the first part of the movie just comes from the fact that everybody knows where this is going. And also, it's trying to show you sort of a normal life in Nazi Germany in the midst of World War II, which just by its very nature has this underlying current of tension. So, but yeah, maybe they could have done that a little bit better. As far as everything else, though, I thought it was interesting. It was compelling. Listening to one of the podcasts with the directors, just an interesting little detail is that according to the records of the Nazi secret police, when Hübener entered the execution chamber, from that time until he was killed was only like 14 seconds. And so they literally made that scene 14 seconds long in the movie. So there was this attention to detail that I thought was interesting. I think I'm going to give it 4 popcorn balls because, kind of like Chris, you were saying earlier, as a first time sort of entree into the religious movie sphere, this is a pretty solid first entry. So I like it. There may be some room to improve, but I'm going to give it 4 popcorn balls. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, you know, I felt like there were some very strong performances here. I thought Ewan Forax, who plays Helmuth Hübener, was very controlled. I thought Rupert Evans, who played the main Nazi in the film, an exceptional performance. I thought it was also shot very well, not innovatively. They certainly aren't pushing any limits here, but I always knew what was happening. I always had a good sense of place. I also felt like compared to Escape from Germany, that I was absorbed into the place. It wasn't just like, hey, let's throw a swastika everywhere and we'll get it right. I thought there was a great kind of artistic design to it, but I shared the plot concerns that Liz had. Some of the pacing there felt languid, and even in the back half, when the tension wrenched up, I felt some of the beats kind of got repeated in the back half a little bit. So even though I think I liked it a little bit more. I'm very stingy on my ratings. I kind of have a flat bell curve I do them on. So like 60% of them are like 2.5 or 3. So it went for 2.5 for me. But for me, that's a pretty favorable rating, especially for a first foray into this.
And our last rating is Gospel Connections, Morally Edifying Messages, 1 to 5 apricots. Chris, we'll have you lead out on this one. Obviously, we've had a great discussion, so let me know what you think. 1 to 5 apricots.
I ended up on 3.5 apricots for the morally edifying message. Certainly, I think it asks some very important questions. You have a very sympathetic but not perfect protagonist, which allows you to kind of engage with some really good questions. But at the end of the day, it feels a little bit hagiographic. I think it avoids some of the most interesting questions and what it's focusing to tell. So certainly success on this front. Certainly one I would want to show to lots of people, but yeah, I ended with 3.5.
So I'm curious, before we go to Liz, what would you have changed to make it a little less hagiographic and more meaty on the sort of nuances of a situation like Hübener found himself in?
Yeah, I think one thing I mentioned earlier in the podcast is I think I might have introduced the district president. So we could have had some more of these interesting discussions about the decision that he was making. I wish some of the comments about why didn't you consider, right, came from people other than the judge, who obviously is a deeply unsympathetic figure. And yet the points he's making were real and ones that I wish the audience could engage with. But they're coming from a figure where you're really disinclined to do it. Again, like I said, with my rating, 3.5 means 80% of films I feel are kind of less than in terms of how moral it is. So certainly a very good effort. But yeah, I think there were definitely things they could have done to cinch it up and maybe take it to the next level.
You mentioned earlier, Liz, that one of the reasons why the play was sort of mothballed for a little while was because of concern for the Soviet saints living in this Cold War situation in the 1970s at the time. I had actually heard from one of these podcasts that I listened to that part of it was that the surviving German saints still did not like Hübener because of the danger he put them in World War II, that was a consideration. So I take your point, Chris, that maybe they would have been better served to have his mom or his stepfather say that. Just give that line of dialogue to someone else would have made a huge difference in sort of the moral weight of that question.
I think the stepfather does say it once, right? When he finds the radio, he says, "Did you consider about your mother's going to get brought in on this?" And they dial it up a little bit by having the love interest plotline, who I believe is totally not historical, but that she gets brought in, and that's finally what makes him crack under pressure. I personally, and maybe there would be more in the miniseries, so I might lean towards the miniseries because I was disappointed they didn't deal with the excommunication thing. And Carl, you say that they do have that in the miniseries version, so I would maybe go with the miniseries for a little bit more, but I'm going to do at least 4 popcorn balls just because it's fascinating to take these kind of questions that are more abstract maybe for us, how did they deal with it over there and that time, and be like, no, we're going to have like your church meeting that you are used to going to, and somebody saying Heil Hitler after the opening prayer when they're making the announcements. It puts it in a whole different ballpark. And I can imagine watching this with my kids and being like, look, this was a real thing that like people just like you had to deal with and figure out how to live through it. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing, like where representation does matter, right? That like seeing yourself in those kinds of situations.
You've given me language for something that I've tried to battle with, and I think now I can finally explain. For a long time, I was almost embarrassed because when I was a younger kid, I was filled with the morality vibes. I just wanted to do what was right, man, and I was like gung-ho, and I got made fun of for it hard. Liz and I knew each other in high school, trust me. Like, I was just the weird kid. I was like, yeah, let's just do what's right. Build Zion, rock on, you know? And then there was like this weird period of just being really embarrassed by that and being like, oh no, that's just so cringe. Like, who does that? That's just so weird. I think the reason why we need some stories that show clear good guys and bad guys isn't to paint the world as without nuance. It's to remind us that when we know what is right and wrong, we have obligations to do what's right. And that it's really hard to do A first and then B. We've got 2 parts to that. We have to discern well enough and then take the action. But what it's doing is chunking it into 2 steps, which is saying, if you know what's right and it's definitely a Nazi, you should probably do something about that. And that actually is really, really good moral formation. And then we can get into how do you know and how do we figure all of that out? But what you're describing to me is like here's a guy who figured it out. We should talk about that. And he may not have done it perfect, and there's all sorts of nuance, and that's great. But at the end of the day, he gave his life to do what he could in his own little patch of vineyard to try to make the world a little bit better. And that's what we're celebrating. That's what we're talking about.
Which, interestingly, it goes back to the Rodney Stark book I brought up a couple times already. Like, the Christian martyrs to die for their faith was part of the spread of Christianity. Maybe in some ways not as much as the Roman Catholic hagiographies of the saints would have you believe, but it is a sociological phenomenon. As much as you can do sociology for things that were happening in the 2nd and 3rd century, was part of the spread of Christianity. And to have martyrs is, I don't know if I want to say it's a healthy part of a religion, but it's having people that dedicated to your religion is certainly healthy for religions. I'll phrase it that way.
Carl, you've been talking about this. If I can just, it's been on my mind the whole time, is like the moral force of the example of the anti-Nephi Lehis who lay down their weapons of war and don't take them up again does not suggest that that's the path for everyone, but it is an overwhelming, like, bring me to my knees kind of an example that says you can't just be utilitarian about this. It isn't just about what's in it for me and how does it work out and what's the output. Sometimes it's just right. And one form that takes is the heroism that it inspires in future generations. Again, I would never say martyrs are a good thing. Like, I think there's obvious problems with that, but I can absolutely nuance the message to see that being willing to die a martyr for what is right and good and decent, there's something about that is good. And maybe that's one of the ways it manifests itself is in the heroism that it inspires in future generations.
Yeah. Anyway, to make a long story short, I give it 4 apricots for gospel connections and morally edifying messages. I thought it was quite good and it made us think. I think this is our longest podcast, and I'm not going to edit this one down. This is all good, and I'm sorry for those of you listening. You're like, oh my gosh, it's an hour and a half long. Well, it's all good, so just listen to it in chunks.
If you made it through the whole thing and enjoyed it, you should come hang out with us sometime, I think is what we've learned, right?
That's right. Anybody who wants to come on the podcast, send Liz and I a message and we'll get you on our list of people. All right. You can follow me at Carl Cranney on Threads. Liz, where can people find you?
You can follow my writing and book reviews at lizbusby.com.
Christopher, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Public Square Magazine, publicsquaremag.org is our website, and I'm running our X account at the moment at Public Square Mag.
And I think I do most of my work now because I'm lazy just on Facebook. So come give me a follow or just talk to me. And I write and I podcast sporadically and other stuff. Probably the best way is just Facebook.
Thanks for joining us this month. If you've enjoyed this episode, share the podcast with a friend who enjoys good movies and good conversation. You can subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice or on YouTube. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode via email, social media, or on our website. Really makes our day as podcast hosts to hear from you. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.